All right, for the First Amendment chapter, I wanted to hit on a couple of pieces regarding the First Amendment. There are five basic freedoms that are protected in the First Amendment. We know about freedom of speech. We know about freedom of religion. We know about freedom of the press. There's also the right to petition the government for redress of grievances, and there's also the freedom to assembly, or you might even say to protest. So it's speech, press, petition, religion, and assembly. Those are the five freedoms. When you look at the First Amendment, you'll notice that in terms of religion, it starts off by saying Congress shall make no. It's very rare in the Constitution that you'll see the word no anywhere. No is absolute. And when you think about what does no mean? No means no. So if it says Congress shall make no law abridging the free exercise of religion, in theory that means that you should be able to worship whatever it is that you want. Maybe you are a Christian, or maybe you are a Muslim, or maybe you worship nature, or maybe you choose not to worship anything at all, or maybe indeed when you think about it you believe in animal sacrifices or people sacrifices to appease your gods. Whatever the case is, when it says Congress shall make no law abridging the free exercise of religion, in theory, if no means no, you should be able to do any of those things. But, as the First Amendment you'll see, no does not always mean no. And for our purposes today, what I wanted to focus on is that, believe it or not, there's actually two parts to the First Amendment. Two parts. One of them is going to be the Establishment Clause. The other one is going to be the Free Exercise Clause. Now, the Establishment Clause. One of the questions that I typically ask classes is going to be, is it legal to pray in the school? Is it legal for you as a 16-year-old student or a 14-year-old student or a 10-year-old student to be able to pray in the public schools? Well, the answer, to be honest with you, is probably maybe, and it depends really on the context. The Establishment Clause is really the piece of the Constitution that deals with an issue like prayer. When you think about it, the Establishment Clause is basically saying, in one sense, that the national government is not allowed to establish a national church or one church. In another sense, it's the idea basically that the federal government can get involved in religion as long as it treats all religions the same way. If the federal government ever elevates one or several religions above the norm, or if it ever maybe, I don't know, discriminates against religions to the point where several are pushed down below the typical standard, those extremes are not allowed. But as long as all religions are treated the exact same way, then indeed the federal government can get involved. Think about it like this. If a church is on fire, some people would argue that the fire department, because it deals with taxpayer dollars, should not be allowed to go and put out the churches, because this would be a violation of the separation of church and state. Some people would say that the Establishment Clause means that government needs to stay completely apart from religious activities. So you got these three. One, the government cannot establish a national church. Two, a government can get involved in religious activities as long as it treats all religions the same. Or three, there must be a complete separation of church and state. Which brings us back to this church on fire. When you think about it, if your church is on fire, odds are you're going to call 911. And 911 is going to bring the fire department there. The fire department is paid for with tax dollars. Some extremists would say that this violates the separation of church and state. Other folks would say, no, as long as you, as the fire department, put out all churches that are on fire, regardless of what their religion is, all churches are being treated the exact same way, so this does not violate the Establishment Clause. Other folks would indeed argue that when you put out the fire at a church, you're not trying to advance or inhibit religion, but rather what you're really doing is protecting the safety of the community that surrounds the church. Maybe it's houses, maybe it's businesses, maybe it's other churches, and that's why you should be allowed to put it out. So this is not an example of a violation of the Establishment Clause. School prayer, however, could conceivably be. And this is the thing. I used to be a public school teacher in the North Carolina public schools. I used to teach in Nash County, which is in the eastern part of the state. And when I taught, we were given strict instructions regarding prayer. If anybody that works with the school leads a prayer, whether it is a principal, whether it is a teacher, whether it is a guidance counselor, whether it is a bus driver or a coach or one of the people that work in the cafeteria, the bottom line is that they are paid by the state And since they're paid by the state, this would be considered a violation of the Establishment Clause. When you're 10 or 12 or 14 or 16, your clay is more easily molded. And if somebody in a position of authority, which any of those people working with the school system would be, if they come in and attempt to lead prayer, you're going to be inclined to lead that prayer not because you believe in it, but because that representative of the state is leading it. There have actually been cases out there where coaches will lead prayer prior to games. And the gist of it is that they're not, praying to save souls. They're not praying, basically, when you think about it, to convert anybody. But what they're doing is they're maybe praying for sportsmanship. They're maybe praying for health during the athletic competition. Sometimes teams will even pray together, opposing teams, in fact, after sporting events. If the coach attempts to lead something prior to an event, the coach is paid for by the school, the coach is a representative of the state, and this, believe it or not, is a violation of the Establishment Clause. Some of you are probably saying, wait a minute, when I was in high school, my coach led locker room prayers and nothing ever happened. Well, that's probably true too. Here's the catch on this. As soon as somebody complains, the school systems will buckle. And if your coach led prayer in the locker room before the game, during the game, after the game, whenever the case might be, if nobody ever complained, then it's going to be perfectly legal. But as soon as somebody does complain, this is considered a violation of the Establishment Clause, and indeed, because the schools have limited budgets, they're typically going to buckle. They don't have the money to be able to pay for expensive lawsuits, and they don't want the negative publicity. So how does it work as far as prayer is concerned? If I'm a student and I want to say grace at lunch, perfectly fine, as long as I'm respectful about it, as long as I'm keeping to myself about it, or I'm around other people of a like mindset. If I try and impose that on other people, that's where it becomes more problematic. But the bottom line is that as long as I'm doing this in a respectful manner, pretty much regardless of the faith, this is going to be fine. If I, as a member of a club with the school, decide to go and pray around the flagpole prior to the school day, perfectly legal. And in fact, if I ask the coach to leave and I, as a student, lead the basketball team or the football team in voluntary prayer, meaning voluntary, not involuntary, but involuntary prayer, then that is going to be perfectly legal as well. The trick is that if that agent of the state becomes involved and there even has the appearance of coercion, that's when it's going to be struck down. The other trick on this is, remember, somebody's got to complain. Because if nobody ever complains, there might be a place where everybody is Baptist, or everybody is Catholic, or everybody is Muslim, or everybody is agnostic. As long as nobody is offended by the prayer and nobody complains, the courts have no case because there's nobody complaining about it. It's going to be considered perfectly legal. As soon as somebody does, though, that's where the problems get started. To give you an idea with the Establishment Clause, there was a band down in Georgia a number of years ago, a band that was practicing for a band competition. Think about your school, and if you were in band, typically the bands that are really good in these competitions believe very strongly in practice, practice, practice. They want to get out there. They want to hit these songs pretty good. There's a lot of drama and a lot of stress that's involved, and certainly there's a lot of pride that people take in this. The school down in Georgia actually picked an old folk song by Charlie Daniels, "The Devil Went Down to Georgia." And if you've ever listened to this song, it's basically a song about the devil falling behind winning souls. The devil goes up to a young kid who's playing a fiddle pretty well and basically places a bet where he will give him a gold fiddle if the boy can play the fiddle better than the devil can, but if the devil plays better, he gets the boy's soul. There's no mention of Jesus. There's really not any mention of hell in there either. It's just a folk song. Well, what ended up happening? The band chose to perform "The Devil Went Down to Georgia." A citizen in the community basically said, no, 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 this is a violation of the Establishment Clause, and they sued the school about a month before the competition to get the band to stop performing that particular song. Note on this, there was no reference to Jesus, there was no reference to God, there was no reference to hell even, there was just a devil and a boy betting for gold versus souls. What happened? The school completely buckled. Was it really an example of the Establishment Clause? No, probably not. But the school didn't have the money in order to pay for the legal case, and indeed they did not try. They pulled the song, the band had to come up with a totally new song really in the last few weeks prior to the competition, and they went forward from there. So while sometimes the Establishment Clause can be very, very helpful as far as prayer is concerned, the fact is it can also be a little bit problematic when people claim Establishment Clause when it might not necessarily be. Another good example of this, and I'll be fairly quick with this, are the Ten Commandments. Is it legal to post the Ten Commandments in the public schools? Well, the answer once again is maybe. Yes and no. How is this? Okay, number one, if you post the Ten Commandments, which are basically Christian doctrines, on the wall, you are elevating one religion over all others, and that is immediately going to be constitutionally suspect, and odds are that's going to be struck down pretty fast. Because when you think about it, all religions have got to be treated the same way. So is there a way to legally post the Ten Commandments? Absolutely. If you put religious doctrines from all faiths, or a good group of faiths up there on the school walls, then that's going to be perfectly legal. Why? Because you have not elevated Christianity above other religions, but you've basically made a religious display on that wall, not a Christian religious display. So if you've got 10 or 15 different doctrines of religions that are on the wall, that's going to be perfectly legal. If you only have one religious doctrine on the wall, that's a violation of the Establishment Clause, because that one is going to be getting a elevated treatment, if you will, elevated stature by being placed on the wall. Now, some folks in the South, and I grew up in North Carolina, would say there's only one religion, and that's the Christian religion, and I don't want any of those other things on the wall. Well, that may very well be. There is another way that you can actually put the Ten Commandments on the wall. And when you think about it, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not commit adultery. These are actually also criminal laws. What you could conceivably do is put the Ten Commandments on the wall, and then maybe put the 10 amendments that are in the Bill of Rights on the wall. You could put state laws on the wall. You could put federal laws on the wall. And the gist of this now becomes, instead of this being a religious display, this is a legal display with religious laws that are included in it. So, you could conceivably demonstrate the Ten Commandments by themselves as long as there were other laws up there. You could conceivably demonstrate the Ten Commandments as part of a religious display if there are a number of other religions up there. But you cannot display the Ten Commandments by themselves if the Ten Commandments are the only religious doctrine, if you will, that's posted on the wall.